So good evening and welcome to the 2025 Dr. David and Maryanne Kozak Gannon Reads program, where READS is an acronym for Reading to Enhance the Awareness of a Diverse Society, an initiative that celebrates the power of words, knowledge, and community. I am Dr. Sarah Ewing, Provost and Vice President for Gannon University, and we are thrilled to have you join us this evening. This program has become an essential cornerstone of the first-year student experience, welcoming our new Gannon students into community through a common read that they receive at convocation. This year we selected You Are Changing the World Whether You Like It or Not by the inspiring David LaMotte, who reminds us that every act of kindness or courage shapes the world around us. Dr. David Kozak and his wife Maryanne are certainly known and respected for their acts of kindness and courage shown throughout their lives. Dr. Kozak served as a distinguished professor of public policy at Gannon until his retirement in 2016. His wife, Maryanne, served as the director of the university's leadership minor program for many years prior to her own retirement. We are very excited to have their son, Tim, with us this evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight, we are also privileged to acknowledge the Jefferson Educational Society and many of its members who are joining us this evening. Their mission has left an indelible mark on civic dialogue and community progress through programs such as the Global Summit Speaker Series, which this event tonight is part of. It is my pleasure to welcome our partner from the JES and a Gannon alum, Mr. Ben Spagan, Vice President of the Jefferson Educational Society, for some opening remarks. Ben.
Thank you, Dr. Ewing. As both a member of the JES team and a proud Gannon University alum, I consider it an honor and a privilege to be here with you all tonight. Think globally and learn locally. That is the spirit of the Jefferson Educational Society and of our nonpartisan think tank's annual Global Summit, which we are so honored and proud to have a partner like Gannon University. That we've grown the Global Summit that began modestly as a 2.5-day conference since its launch in 2009 to an 18-event world-class speaker series that it is today, having brought in scores of leaders, innovators, practitioners, big thinkers to present big, bold ideas and cutting-edge research in Erie, Pennsylvania is a testament to our community's desire to want to learn, listen, and engage in productive dialogue that informs future conversations and action, and the transformational potential of strong, lasting community partnerships. To the many who've made the JES's growth and that of the Global Summit, we do owe them our thanks. The entire JES team, under the leadership and direction of our president, Dr. Furky Ferrati, also a proud Gannon alum. Our board of trustees, currently led by Dr. Behar Gaucher, and once chaired by Dr. David Kozak, after whom the Gannon Reads program has been named. And again, Tim, thank you for being here with us tonight. And thanks too to the additional civic-minded, community-rooted organizations that partner with and support the Global Summit, like LeCom Health, Erie Insurance, Erie News Now, Logistics Plus, PNC, the Brock Institute, the Erie County Gaming Revenue Authority, Bruce and Sarah McWilliams, and many more that all make the Global Summit possible, including Gannon University, who has been a committed, thoughtful, and engaged partner in this work for many years now, including inviting us to have this opportunity to be a part of the Gannon Reads event and include it in the Global Summit. So thanks, of course, do go to Gannon President Dr. Iwanenko, Gannon Provost Dr. Ewing, the entire Gannon University staff, especially Dr. Jeffrey Bloodworth, with whom we've had the pleasure of working with on the Global Summit for many years, Carolyn, Nancy, Paul, Jill, Nick, Tori, and the many others that help support the many events that we are engaged in together. Thanks too, of course, goes to David LaMotte for being here tonight, for sharing his knowledge and expertise and insight and experience to a crowd of Golden Knights and Jeffersonians sitting shoulder to shoulder for this intergenerational learning opportunity. Tonight's event is the third in a series of 17, and I'm so delighted to have seen many of you at the past two and look forward to seeing you at those coming forward, including two on the campus of Gannon University next week. Monday's event, October 20th, and Wednesday's event, October 22nd. Two different events, one looking at politics, the American presidency at 250 years, and looking at the power of sports and perseverance with none other than Jim Kelly, Hall of Fame quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. And of course, much more. And we conclude here on December 4th at the Warner Theater, where we look forward to seeing many of you gathered together again to learn from renowned award-winning filmmaker, literary scholar, institution builder, and host of Discovering Your Roots, Dr. Henry Louis Gates. If you aren't registered for any of those events, find one of our team members or the helpful members of the Gannon University team. So again, it's been an absolute honor to say a few words up here before you tonight, and thanks to our guest, David LaMotte, to Dr. Iwanenko, Dr. Ewing, the entire Gannon community, the Erie community, our partners and patrons. Sincerely, thank you all for creating this space and being present to this learning opportunity. Now to introduce tonight's speaker, please join me in welcoming to the stage Gannon University Dean of Student Development and Engagement, Mr. Paul Perrine.
Good evening. David LaMotte is a songwriter, speaker, and author. He has performed over 3,500 concerts, released 13 full-length CDs, toured in all 50 states and 5 of the 7 continents. His dense speaking and working calendar and workshop calendar include presenting at the Presbyterian Church USA, Mission to the United Nations, keynoting peace conferences in India, Australia, Germany, Zambia, and the Scottish Parliament. In June, he keynoted the opening plenary of the Rotary International Convention in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, for an audience of 16,000 people. David's second TEDx talk from 2024, Why Heroes Don't Change the World, was chosen as an editor's pick by TED.com. In 2009, David suspended his music career for 2 years to pursue his other primary vocation by accepting a Rotary Peace Fellowship to study international relations, peace, and conflict resolution at the University of Queensland in Brisbane, Australia. As part of this study, he also spent time in rural Andhra Pradesh, India, working with a Gandhian development organization. LaMotte's fourth book, You Are Changing the World, Whether You Like It or Not, has been used as a textbook at universities and colleges across the US and Australia. David has made his home for more than 30 years in Black Mountain, North Carolina, where he currently resides with his wife, son, old dog, and 4 chickens. David has been a consistent presence in the restoration efforts following the devastation Hurricane Helene has had in his hometown of Western North Carolina. From community organizing to benefit concerts and advocacy work, David has been putting into practice many principles in his book. Please welcome David LaMotte.
Hi. It's good to see y'all. What a privilege to have a little bit of your time tonight. Time is a non-renewable resource. You only get so much of it. So I don't take yours lightly, in all honesty. I respect the fact that your time here is precious. This particular constellation of spirits has never existed before in a room. What's happening right now has never happened before, and it'll never happen again. So my sincere hope is that it will matter. I don't have any illusions that I have more wisdom to share than any of you do when you step up here. But I think we all gain by sharing our stories, sharing what we've learned from our own experiences. So I want to welcome you and I want to share some stories, and I hope they will serve you well. I'm going to say something that you rarely hear speakers say from the stage, people with microphones and clickers and stuff. Seldom say, I don't want you to trust me. But I at least don't want you to trust me for the wrong reasons. I don't want you to trust me because I'm the guy in the front with a clicker. That's a terrible reason to trust people, right? I can see you and hear you and stuff, right? Okay, cool. I also don't want you to trust me because what I'm saying sounds hopeful, because if what I'm saying sounds hopeful but it's not true, then I'm not serving you well, I'm not serving me well, I'm not serving the world well, right? So that's a terrible reason to trust me. So what I would like for you to do is to examine the ideas that I'm sharing with you against your own lived experience and see if it makes sense to you. And if it does, great. And if it doesn't, if the purpose I serve for you is to help you articulate what you don't believe, I will be grateful to have served you that way. So I'm not showing up here with any illusion that I have all the answers, but I have some different questions. I think often as a society, as we think about how we have impact in the world, we are asking questions that are not as helpful as some other questions. And honestly, if you're asking the wrong questions, it doesn't really matter that much what the answers are. So I want to offer you some different questions, and I hope they'll be of use to you. My sister, Kathy, is a recently retired public defender. She's a lawyer. And I think the way this works is that because she's a lawyer, I get to say stipulate. I think that's how it works. So I want to see if we can stipulate one idea, which means that we can just agree on this without having to argue about it too much. And if we can agree on this idea, we can stack other ideas on top of it. I think we can do this. Let's just see. The stipulation that I'm asking you for is that stories matter. That stories matter a great deal more than we give them credit for. Here's my hypothesis. I'm thinking that we live our lives based on stories we believe about the world, about ourselves, about how things work. So some of those stories we've soaked in from our culture, some of them we've learned from our own experience. And when you believe a particular story, it influences how you see the world, and then you make decisions based on how you see the world. So if you tell a better story, it can literally change the world. The stories we believe matter. But it gets a little stranger than that. I want to suggest that we understand the world not just in terms of data, in terms of information, but in terms of stories, because data doesn't take on meaning until we give it a story. If we say this data matters because of this and that and the other, then it has a story. And from that, we can extrapolate some ideas that might matter. Now, this is where it gets stranger. Stories can influence our actions even when we're unaware of them. So if you've been soaking in a story your whole life, say a story like racism or sexism, there's plenty of that in our culture. I feel like I've been marinating in it to some degree my whole life. So though I've spent a lot of my life fighting against racism and fighting against sexism, it doesn't mean that I'm free of those things, because I've been marinating in it my whole life. So it's easy to be influenced by a story, even if not only if I'm unaware of it, but if I completely reject it. That's where it gets really strange. I utterly reject racism and sexism. But it doesn't mean that I'm free of that story. Am I making sense so far? Are you with me more or less? Okay. So, here's another story that I want us to look at. A story that I think we've been soaking in our whole lives. And here's the question that it's trying to answer. The question is, if we've got really big problems, how do we effectively address really big societal level, global level problems? I think almost everybody agrees on one thing these days. There aren't many things people agree on right now. But I think almost everybody agrees that we've got some really big problems we need to work on. We might disagree as to which are the problems and what the best solutions are, but almost everybody agrees that things are not entirely okay in the world right now. So it makes sense to ask this question. What works when you've got really big things to work on? We've got a whole history of the world to look at to see when positive change happened in various cultures, how did it happen? So I think our culture here in the US, and I'm going to speak to US culture just because it's the one I know best. I think our culture here in the US has an answer to that question. And I think the answer is everywhere. And I think the answer is wrong. Here's the story I see everywhere. What you need, if you got a really big problem, is a hero to fix it for you. You need somebody really special, somebody extraordinary to do something dramatic in a moment of crisis, and they fix the problem, and then you move on to the next problem. I think that's our dominant cultural narrative of change. Let me lay it out more specifically. So when I say somebody extraordinary, first word is extraordinary, extraordinary, not ordinary, not me. Because I don't know about you, I don't wake up feeling particularly heroic in the morning. I wake up feeling like I need to brush my teeth, not that I need to put on my cape. I wake up feeling kind of ordinary. So if you have to be extraordinary to affect change in the world, well then it's not my job. That's not me. So somebody extraordinary with special gifts, they're extra brave, they're extra smart, they're extra strong. They respond to a moment of crisis. And a moment of crisis doesn't mean a really big problem. It means a really urgent problem. It's happening right now. The tree is falling on the baby carriage, and if you don't move the carriage or catch the tree or something, it's too late. It's over, right? So a crisis is super urgent. It's happening right now. You respond to the crisis, the hero responds to the crisis with dramatic action, and that's how we get to change. I don't know if you are with me that this is our dominant narrative. But I would suggest that if we drove down to Cleveland or somewhere where there is a movie theater with 15 movies on the marquee, and we went through them and we said, how many of these movies actually have this plot? How many of them would have this plot, more or less? Right? Maybe 15, maybe 13, who knows, but most of them, right? Yes. It's a pretty dominant story. And I'm not just talking about the superhero movies. I'm talking about dramas, and I'm talking about comedies. I'm talking about children's entertainment. This is a story we're soaked in our whole lives. So it's really hard to live out of a different story. There is actually a different story. And that story is a lot less popular. But it has the added benefit of being true. Here's some examples of the dominant story. Now, the other story is quite different from the first one. This is the movement narrative. The movement narrative says if you got a really big problem, what you need is a lot of people to work on it in the same direction. A lot of folks to do a little bit each, moving in the same direction. So many people, small intentional efforts in the same direction. There may be some people, of course, who are doing more. Movements have leaders. But if you don't have a lot of people doing a little bit each in the same direction, it's not fitting my definition of a movement. So I've got this question for you. Can you find any example in all of history of a hero narrative actually being true when you're looking at a large-scale problem? A large-scale problem that was effectively addressed by a hero doing something dramatic in the absence of a movement. Because I've been trying to think of one for 20 years and I haven't found one yet. Isn't it wild that that could be our dominant narrative of change? And it's never happened once in the history of the world. So I wonder if we need a better story. The obvious next question to ask is, who cares? Is this just like an academic exercise? Or does it have impact on how you live your daily life as human beings and students at Gannon and out in the world around you? You won't be surprised to hear me say that I think it has a really big impact for those of you who are paying attention to this question. If you switch your narrative, if you switch your story, then you make decisions based on a different story. Those decisions do affect not only your life, but the world around you. So let me lay it out for you. If you subscribe to the hero narrative, either consciously or even subconsciously, and you got a really big problem to work on, then what are your instructions? What's the first thing that needs to happen chronologically in the hero narrative that I just laid out? What's the first thing that happens? Anybody? You put on your cape. Okay, so you'll be ready when the next thing happens. So then what happens? Step one, the crisis happens. If you're not the hero, what's your job in the crisis? Yeah, right, you don't have one. Exactly. So you hang out and you wait. So step one in changing the world for the better is wait while the crisis happens. And then step two, what do we need? Now that there's a crisis, we need a hero, right? And where do you get the hero? They usually show up right in the nick of time, right? In the movies, that's kind of how it works out. So let's say wait. You wait some more. And then step three, what happens? The hero, right, the hero fixes the problem. The hero takes dramatic action, and your job is to, hang out, wait, watch, exactly, maybe shoot a little phone video, right? And then after that comes step four. And now you actually have an active role, and your job is to clap, exactly, that's your job, to clap. Right, so just to recap, if you want to change the world for the better, if you see really big problems that need to be worked on, and you want to change the world for the better, here are the steps. Number one, wait. Number two, wait some more. Number three, watch. Number four, clap. How's that working out? Yeah, I don't think it's working out all that well. Let's take a quick look at the movement narrative of change. So the movement narrative says, number one, ask yourself what's on your heart. What really feels like something you need to work on in the world around you? That's step one. Step two is to find your community, because this isn't a hero story, it's a movement story. So where are there other people who care about what you care about? They are probably already gathered somewhere working on it, but if they're not, get some friends together to talk about it. People that you think might care about this, and exchange ideas and just gather. You don't have to have a plan when you gather. That's why you gather. You come up with the plan together. And when you gather, you also do what you call an asset inventory. When you gather, you decide you want to work on a problem, then you look at, what do I bring to this? And you ask everybody, and you create a virtual pile of those resources in the middle of the table there. So my wife taught me this wonderful tool for doing an asset inventory. One is to say, what are gifts of the head? What are things that we know about around this table? And then what are gifts of the heart? Things that you really are passionate about, maybe because they've touched your life directly. Then gifts of the hands. What can you do with your hands? Fix bicycles, play guitar, make a mean pastrami sandwich. What can you do with your hands? And then number four, gifts of the hive, which means what communities are you connected to that you can draw on to help in this work? When you go around the table with a group of 5 or 6 people and you each list out the things that you bring, it's interesting what you have to work with. And then you look creatively at the problem that you're trying to work on and you say, how could we use these things to work on this problem? You make a plan to do something achievable that you can get done in the next few weeks. Maybe not end world hunger, but maybe get this letter written to the paper to make this suggestion to the community about something we can work on to make things a little bit better in our town. And then you get to work. I don't know if y'all noticed, but those are very different instructions. There's not a lot of waiting in this one. There's a lot of gathering and figuring things out and working on it. It's a very different story, but it's not our dominant story as a culture. I want to tell you a hero story because I want to be clear about something that I'm not saying. I don't want you to misunderstand me. I am not telling you that there are not heroes or that they don't deserve our respect. People do heroic things every day, and we should honor that. So I want to tell you a story about one of those people. This is a man named Wesley Autry. In January 2007, he was waiting on a subway platform in New York with his 2 young daughters. He had just gone by to pick them up from school, and the 3 of them were going home on the New York Metro. And they're waiting on the train, and if you've been to New York City, you know how that looks. You're waiting here behind this yellow line, and then there's this drop down to the tracks. And the trains come in, and you can walk in flat because the tracks are down far below. So he's hanging out there, and he's chatting with the woman next to him, and he's holding the hands of his little girls. And he looks, and he sees something going on up the platform. And there's some commotion, and he says, "Would you just watch my girls for a second? I'm going to go check this out." And he goes up there, and a young film student, 22-year-old film student named Cameron Halapeter, has fallen to the ground and is having a grand mal epileptic seizure on the tracks. Wesley Autry tried to help. He wanted to make sure he wouldn't bite his tongue off, so he kind of wedged something in his jaw so that he wouldn't clamp down. And he looked out for him for a few minutes, and then he started to recover. And Cameron Halapeter, this young film student, he was over 6 feet tall, he started to stand up, but he really wasn't ready to. He was still in the throes of the seizure. And he fell into the tracks. Wesley Autry and another bystander immediately jumped down, and they try to get him up. But he's over 6 feet tall, he can't help them because he's having a seizure, and these two bystanders can't get him up to the platform, which is maybe 4 feet high. And they're trying to do that, and then they look up and there's a train coming, and it's coming fast. And the other bystander, understandably, no shame, decides, "I can't save this man, there's no point in my dying," and she gets out of the subway tracks. Wesley Autry looks at the man, looks at the train, looks at the space under the train, the little drainage ditch in there, and he decides he can get in there. So he lays down on top of Cameron Halapeter, and he pulls his arms in and his legs in, and he pins them down with his own arms and legs so they won't be cut off by the train. And he lies down on top of him, and the train goes over them. And the engineer sees them there, but he can't stop the train. So he slams on the brakes, and there's sparks flying everywhere, and 5 cars go over them before the train stops. The train stops. Remember, his daughters are on the platform. The train stops, and you hear Wesley Autry call out from beneath the train, "We're all right." And they were all right. And they pulled him out. Let me ask you a really stupid question. I'm asking you a stupid question. I'm telling you it's a stupid question before I ask you. So don't look at me like, "David, that's a really stupid question." Was that a heroic thing to do? Yeah. All respect to Wesley Autry. What an extraordinary man to do this for a stranger. That's worthy of celebration, and celebrate him we did. Ellen DeGeneres had him on her show, and she gave him a Jeep Patriot. Playboy magazine was happy about the advertising. See the little logo on his beanie. They sent him a new beanie and a lifetime subscription. People celebrated him all the way across the political and cultural spectrum, and they should, right? David Letterman had him on the show and celebrated him. The next month, George W. Bush was the president at the time. The next month was the State of the Union, and George Bush invited Wesley Autry to come to the State of the Union, sit in the balcony. They asked him to stand, and he rose, and at that time, it was the longest standing ovation that had ever happened at a State of the Union address. Here's a beautiful example of American heroism. Yes to that. But friends, does it scale? Is this a good model for changing the world? Because I think it's our dominant model. I think it's a good example of the hero narrative as I described it before. If you want to be like Wesley Autry, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do this week to be like Wesley Autry? What are you going to do? Like hang out in subways? Wait for people to have problems? If this is our model, how do you work on climate change? Go to the North Pole and catch polar bears as they slide off of icebergs? It doesn't really make any sense, right? This isn't how we do this work. We gather and we do the tedious part, not the dramatic part, but the tedious part to move things forward. So I'm not saying that people don't do heroic things or that we shouldn't honor that. We should. But I don't think it's our best model for confronting the really big problems that we're up against these days as a nation. And I want to think about how we define hero. What does hero actually mean? Now, by the dictionary, it ought to mean somebody who does something heroic. But I don't think that really fits our cultural definition. I think mostly we think of a hero not as somebody who did something, but as a particular kind of person. There are heroes over here, and then there's the rest of us. And heroes change the world, and the rest of us clap. And I don't actually think that's how it works. I think the big changes have always been made by people who consider themselves quite normal people and show up to do the work. Wesley Autry, of course, was mobbed by the media when this happened, and they asked him the question that the media always asks people when they do something super heroic, which is, how does it feel to be a hero? And he said what heroic people always say in response to that question, which was, I just did what anybody would do. I did what I had to do in the moment. I'm not really a hero. And that's appropriate humility in a moment like that, but I also think it has to do with the fact that he can't imagine himself being a hero because heroes are a special kind of person, and I'm just me. I just did this thing, right? So, another hero story. And I'd speak about this one with the understanding that I'm a white man and Rosa Parks was a black woman. And so there are things about her story that I'll never understand because of lived experience. But I think it's a very important story for all of us to study. And it's a story many of you already know, some version of, right? What Rosa Parks did on December 1st, 1955, at 6:04 p.m., Thursday evening. You know about her famous arrest, yeah? Y'all know that story? Some version of it anyway, perhaps. Let me tell you how I first learned that story. When I was in elementary school, I learned that Rosa Parks was a little old black lady who was on her way home from work, and she was tired after a long day of work, and she was riding on the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. And in that time, in 1955, both the law and the customs of the day said that if more white people got onto a full bus, she would have to rise and go to the back of the bus so that they could sit down. Those were the rules culturally and legally in that time. But that day she refused to do it. The bus driver threatened her with arrest, and then she was arrested. And that arrest gave flame to the nascent civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement grew and became quite successful and changed the world, all because of this one dramatic action that she took on that one day. Is that roughly how y'all learned the story? More or less? That's how I first learned it. And as I've studied it more and more, I've been amazed at how inadequate that telling of the story is. There is so much left out of that telling of the story. Let me clarify, my respect for Rosa Parks has deepened. It has not diminished by learning more about the story. But I respect her for completely different reasons. What they didn't tell me in elementary school was that by the time she was arrested that day, December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks had already been an activist for over 20 years. She'd been in the work, doing the work day in and day out, week to week. She was the secretary for the NAACP in Montgomery, Alabama, which was a leading anti-racist organization in those days and still doing very, very good work. She worked for them for 12 years as a volunteer, as the secretary for the Montgomery NAACP. She was deep in the work for 12 years before that arrest. 3 months before that arrest, she traveled all the way to Tennessee to the Highlander Center, which was a training center where people went to study civil rights activism. She spent a week learning about voter registration and nonviolent activism, and then 3 months later, what a coincidence, she got arrested on that bus. Who would have seen that coming? As we tell this story, the most common telling, Rosa Parks' life was one day long. And that's just not a true story. You see already how the hero story begins to expand into a movement story. But where it really takes a turn is where you meet Joanne Robinson, who is the president of the Women's Political Council, which was an organization working on racial equity in Montgomery. They had been working together for 9 years, this large group of African American women who were doing really important work that was rather tedious, frankly. They had lots of committee meetings. They had 3 chapters in Montgomery, and Joanne Robinson was the president. Well, when Rosa Parks got arrested that day, what was the date? December 1st, 1955. Very good. December 1st, 1955, the word quickly got to Joanne Robinson because somebody on the bus took a picture with their phone and put it on Instagram. Good, I just want to make sure you're with me. All right. So, no, somebody went into a nearby house and picked up a phone and called and said, hey, Joanne, you should know what's going on. Rosa Parks was just arrested on this bus. They knew each other because of activism. This is happening. And Joanne Robinson got the details, and then she made a couple of other phone calls. She called a couple of other activists in town, Fred Gray and E.D. Nixon, and neither of them were home, but she left messages for them, and then she made a decision. She made the decision to call the Montgomery bus boycott. And she called 3 more people. She called the guy at the college where she worked, which was Alabama State. She was an English teacher there. It was then a school for black students. And she called the guy with the keys to the copy room, the head of the business department, and said, can you come down to the school and unlock the copy room? I'd really appreciate that. And he said, sure. So he came down, unlocked the copy room, went home. And she called 2 of her English students from her Friday morning English class that she trusted, and she said, can you meet me at the school at midnight? And they did. And Joanne Robinson and her 2 students then made 17,500 copies on an old school mimeograph machine. They didn't punch in 17500 and hit the green button. They did this for hours and hours and hours. And they made 17,500 copies of this strip flyer in 3 sections, and then they cut them all, and then they bundled them all, and then they put them all in the back of her station wagon, and they drove them around town and dropped them off at the homes of Women's Political Council members who were waiting for them. And then took those bundles and took those flyers and put them on every home and every business and every church in their neighborhoods. So that within 12 hours of Rosa Parks' arrest, almost everybody in the black part of Montgomery, which was very segregated at the time, knew about this boycott on Monday. They knew not to ride the buses. Because black people were about 70% of the ridership of the buses in Montgomery in 1955. And so they said, look, if you're going to treat us this way, we're going to stop giving you our money. Here's the wild thing. That boycott was organized, fully organized, a year in advance. They had it ready to go. We still have a letter that's signed by Joanne Robinson and several other women in the Women's Political Council to the mayor of Montgomery saying, look, these things are happening and they've got to stop happening. People keep driving away after you've paid because if you were black in 55 in Montgomery, you paid at the front and then you got off and you went to the back and you came back in. And some of the bus drivers thought it would be funny to drive away after people had paid for their seats. So that happened quite a lot. They named that in their letter. They said, look, once you've paid for your seat and sat down, we'd like to be able to stay in our seats. They weren't even asking for an end to segregation, but they made some very reasonable demands. For black parts of town, we would like some black bus drivers. Those were the kinds of demands they made. So they were ready to go when Rosa Parks got arrested. They didn't wait till the fire broke out to build the fire station. They had done the boring, tedious committee meetings to have it all ready to go. So, how is it that we all understand this story as a hero story? As one person doing something dramatic, and then the world changing? When we have very clear documentation that that's not what happened. It's a movement story. All these people were involved in making it happen. Why is it that we carve away facts from a movement story to make it into a hero story? Any thoughts on that? Why do we prefer hero stories? There are a lot of you here. I'm thinking somebody has an idea. Yeah.
It's always going to be someone else's responsibility.
That's a really good reason. I think that's very appealing, right? In the hero narrative of change, my gig is to clap. That's a good job. I like that one. In the movement narrative of change, it's my job to show up and do the work. And that sounds a little less fun, but the truth is there are such gifts in the movement work because you become part of a family of people who trust each other and can feel that you're making a difference in the world. It's really quite a gift once you get in there. So yeah, I think there are two main reasons. One, hero stories are a lot easier to tell. They're more fun, they're more dramatic, it's an easier narrative arc, right? But the big one is that in a hero story, I don't really have to do anything. The problem is we do have to do some things because we have some really big problems ahead of us. And we're going to need each other to work on them. So why does it matter that we tell these hero stories when they're not entirely true? In fact, as I said, I can't find a single example in all of history. One, because these hero stories are immobilizing. That's why they're a problem. It's strange because we tell hero stories in order to inspire people, right? But often it works backwards because if heroes change the world and I'm not a hero, then it's not my job to change the world. And beyond that, as we've discussed, it's not the heroic action that really makes the difference. Here's how I can prove that to you. How many of y'all know who Claudette Colvin is? I imagine I would guess 10, 15% of you will know who Claudette Colvin is. Claudette Colvin got arrested 9 months before Rosa Parks doing the exact same thing Rosa Parks did. She was 15 years old. Rosa Parks was deeply trained in nonviolence. Claudette Colvin was not. When the police officer said, "Ms. Parks, I'm going to have you arrested if you don't give me that seat," she said, "You may do that." Steeped in nonviolence. Those were her exact words, according to her autobiography. "You may do that. I'm making this decision, now you get to make a decision. You may do that, you may do something else. Now you get to make your decision, but you don't get to make mine." I think all that is in those 4 little words. You may do that. That is not what Claudette Colvin said when they pulled her off the bus. She let them know the full extent of her vocabulary. And the movement said, maybe not our spokesperson, right? So they gave it a miss. There was another woman, Aurelia Browder, who did the same thing before Rosa Parks. But they thought, no, she's not quite the one either. There was a woman named Viola White who did the same thing that Rosa Parks did 10 years before Rosa Parks did it, in 1945. If it were the heroic action that changed things, friends, you would know all of their names. But we don't. We know Rosa Parks' name because the movement said, yes, this is the time. This woman just radiates dignity. And she's so well-spoken, and she's clear in her training on nonviolence. This is our moment. And they launched this boycott. How long did the boycott go on? Anybody know? 382 days, longer than a year. Folks kept not riding those buses. So they're a problem because they're immobilizing. They're a problem because they're individualistic. They focus on the individual and not on community work. And we've already discussed the fact that that just doesn't work. It's not how change actually happens. They're ineffective. And we have work to do. So the hero narratives are not serving us. We need to replace that story with a movement narrative. But I keep using this phrase, change the world, as though that's a reasonable thing to say. If you run into somebody tomorrow outside of class before you go into class and they say, "What'd you do last night?" Say, "Oh, I went to hear this guy talk." Yeah, what did he talk about? Oh, he talked about changing the world. They're going to be like, oh, really? Good luck with that, right? I went to get a master's degree in peace studies a few years back in Australia, and when I told people I was going to get a master's degree, they would be like, great. And they'd say, what are you doing? And I'd say, peace studies. And they'd be like, good luck with that, right? Peace studies, okay. But it's not naive to think you can change the world, friends. It's really not. The problem is we use the phrase change the world and the phrase fix the world and the phrase save the world like they mean the same thing, and they don't. If you think you can fix the world, that's totally naive. It is. That's not going to happen. As long as there's two of us here left, we're going to have things to work on. If you think you can save the world, I'd just like to respectfully suggest that might not be your gig. But if you think you can change the world, you're just paying attention. The truth is, you can't be in the world and not change it. I don't know if people are already asking y'all, so what are you going to do with your life? Now you're in college. What are you majoring in? What's going to happen for the rest of your life? If so, you have no responsibility or need to answer that question because it's a dumb question. The question isn't, what are you going to do with your life? Because the fact is, you're going to do a ton of things with your life. Lots and lots of different things. And what am I going to do with my life is an immobilizing, enormous question. I'm going to say something, I don't know how folks will feel about it here. But I think it's true. Y'all, you do not have a calling. You have thousands upon thousands of callings. Big ones and little ones and medium-sized ones. You're on this planet for many, many reasons, not just one. You can hold the door for somebody and smile at them and literally save their lives. I don't know if y'all have ever been that dark, where you can't believe there's any real kindness in the world. But then you encounter the smallest kindness that's obviously sincere, and it shakes that worldview, and you decide to stick around a little longer. Holding that door, that smile, if that's not a calling, I don't know what a calling is. So how about instead of, what am I going to do with my life, we just say, what am I going to do next? Where am I feeling drawn right now? What is the work before me to do? Which part of the work that needs to happen in the world is mine? Because not all of it is yours. You can't do it all. Which part of this is mine to do? I think that's a better question. It's not naive to think you can change the world. It's naive to think you could possibly be in the world and not change it. Everything you do changes the world, whether you like it or not. So the questions for us are, which changes are we going to make? Thanks for your time tonight. Good to be with you.
One more time, can we thank David LaMotte for an incredible message? So I know tonight that we're going to explore how each of us is changing the world. And I have to say, I have this stack of note cards here that our students have submitted for questions to share with David, and that we can have a dialogue this evening together. And so I want to thank first, before I forget, all of our students for your engagement with the book, for being here and being attentive this evening. So can we also give all of you a round of applause and our members from the Jefferson. So how are you feeling so far this evening?
I'm really glad to be right where I am. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. Really appreciate this beautiful hospitality. Thank you.
Wonderful.
And also, I'll say, when people ask me how I'm doing these days, I've fallen into the habit of saying many ways all at the same time. because there's a lot going on in the world, right? And I'm feeling it pretty deeply. In my little life, things are kind of over the moon great. Lots of really good things are going on. And also, I lost my mom in May, and that's really real. That's hard, right? All these things happen at the same time. I've never existed along a continuum of good to bad. I've always been feeling all of it at the same time. And I think maybe that's some of you too. So if so, I see you. How you holding up?
Thank you. We spoke a little bit about this earlier this evening, and I would say my heart is feeling pretty lifted tonight. I will be perfectly honest, and I like to be honest with our students. This morning started a little frustrated. I was a little frustrated. But then I leaned on some people and some close relationships who helped pick me up, and then I had some incredible productive conversations. And then, of course, our time this evening has made me think and reflect on all of the stories of the people changing the world of those around them in such positive ways that I am truly feeling lifted. So, thank you.
Thank you.
So, one of the questions, I'll start with your core message, is as we think about, in your words just a few moments ago, you can't be in the world and not change it. So what do you hope that your readers, and particularly our students here this evening, take away from realizing that they are changing the world?
People sometimes say you write the book that you want to read. And I really did write this work out of my own struggles and my own wrestling with so much going on in the world, and sometimes a feeling of complete powerlessness. So I want to say, you're not powerless, right? And when I dig in, I find, oh yeah, I'm not powerless. I just thought the power was individual, and it's not. We are not powerless, but our power lies in solidarity and community and working together. That's really where it comes together.
So one of the core messages, and I was counting, I think between Ben and myself, we may have used the word community like 10 times in our introduction. And again, through conversation with you this evening, I learned that community means a lot to you too. We talk about the Gannon community, the Gannon family. Can you tell us and share a little bit about your kind of definition of community and what that means? What you think it means?
Yeah. So I live in western North Carolina, right outside of Asheville, North Carolina. About a year ago, we were in the news quite a lot because we had Hurricane Helene come and park on top of us in the mountains. And we had horrific winds and heavy flooding, and about 100 people died in my little community. It was really quite intense. My house was without power for about 5 weeks, I think, about that. We were without any water at all, nothing in the pipes for about a month. And then for a couple weeks after that, the water that came out, you shouldn't touch it because it would turn your skin red. It was super toxic. We didn't have internet, we didn't have reliable cell signal. It was very intense. It was a really heavy time for us in western North Carolina. And you know what happened? I feel like the hurricane in some ways was a response to the pandemic. The pandemic said to us, you can't be with people in person, but we're going to hyper-connect you to people far away. Then the hurricane came and said, you know what? You can't talk to anybody who's not right in front of you, so go out in the street and meet your neighbors. Everybody's food was thawing. So people started grilling up in their front yards and saying, hey, anybody who walks by, have some food, please. We're cooking it. Eat it. People started taking care of each other, and people started showing up with chainsaws. The sound of a chainsaw became the most beautiful sound to us because it was the sound of people helping out their neighbors, and people would just cutting trees off of people's roofs, doing beautiful things for each other, and I never, ever heard anybody ask, who'd you vote for? Before they cut the tree off your roof. Not once. So community for me is a group of people who are connected to each other and acknowledge that connectedness. And sometimes a community feels really fractured, but I think physical communities, gathering in a room together, as opposed to online communities can be really beautiful in making good things happen, but they're really easy to click out of. And very often people don't notice you're gone in an online community. In your neighborhood, when a tree falls on your neighbor's house, you see that, right? So people came right out into the street and took care of each other. And that felt was such a powerful reminder of what community really means. People who are connected to each other.
That's beautiful. And I think as we think about our connection to our community and who we are as a Erie community and a Gannon community, I think that really resonates here locally as well. So thank you for sharing that. So one of the students asked, how can we actively make good choices that are good for us and the world around us? Because sometimes that can be a challenge.
I don't know if that student's here tonight, but
I hope she is.
yeah, well, I think you already know based on asking that question, right? If you're asking the question, how can I care for the community around me and take care of myself, you're already there. You understand to hold those two things in tandem. There's some people who don't understand that. There are folks who really are only thinking about themselves. That's true, that happens. And then there are other people who see the love of community as martyrdom, as cost to ourselves. I want to encourage you not to destroy yourself in the service of the world around you. You're going to be more useful if you also take care of yourself and stay in it for the long run. So I really think you know the answer to that question already by virtue of the fact that you asked it.
So tonight you shared some hero stories from people from the U.S. You talked about U.S. culture, but you've traveled the world quite a bit. Yeah. And I think a lot of our students had questions about your travel experiences, your time in India. So combining kind of two of the questions from them, how did your trip to India change the way you saw the world? Or how did your experience traveling impact your viewpoints that contributed to the message in the book?
I really highly recommend international travel. A lot of you are internationally traveling to be here. We learn a great deal by coming to understand that there are many kinds of normal. Does that make sense to you? Right? There are many kinds of normal. My normal is not normal, it's just my normal. And when I see other people living in their normal, I come to understand that, oh yeah, the way my life has been is not a given. It's just one way to do it. And that is a beautiful gift to me. The other beautiful gift I find in travel, aside from just being exposed to things that make you think differently, which is wonderful, is that when you change everything about your life except you, when you go somewhere else and everything is different except you're still there, it becomes easier to determine which part of your experience is you and which part of your experience is the rest of the world. So you really get to know yourself better. And that's a profound gift. I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. Let me say a word about India specifically, because I didn't touch on that part. I was in India for 3 months, and I was working with an Indian nonprofit, an NGO that was based in India. So I was the only foreigner on staff. Everybody else was Indian, and there were a couple hundred people on staff. And they were doing sustainable development on a Gandhian model. The patriarch of this family that ran this NGO was a friend of Gandhi's. His name was Gora. A lot of folks in that era, in that place and time, chose one name because their last name would indicate their caste, and they didn't want to work within the caste system. So they just chose a name that didn't say where they fall. That family was extraordinary, and they taught me so much. And right before I went from Australia to India, there was a big flood on the Bay of Bengal, which is where they were. And so I packed boots and gloves in my backpack when I went. And I got there and I realized what a dumb thing to do that was. Right? There are some things that are hard to come by in India. Manual labor is not one of them. These are people who know exactly how to do this work. They're going to do it better than me. And I grew up in a church community that went overseas to do work projects. But the truth is, we would build a wall kind of badly, and there was a mason in the village who could have built the wall better and kind of needed the work. I'm not trashing those programs, because the truth is, you build community by doing that work together. That can really matter. But I realized that it makes a really big difference to find the intersection between what you actually bring, what you're good at, and what needs to be done, and not assume that you know before you go. So what they did was have me take a bunch of pictures and write some articles and create some brochures to explain to Westerners about the work they were doing in India. because the way they were doing their marketing didn't make sense to folks where I'm from. So I got to be a translator for them to tell their story a little bit better. And that was better work for me. I was more useful by doing the thing that I was a little bit better at.
So I'm going to share one of the great opportunities for our new students, and for those who may not be aware that we do this at Gannon, is we do these alternative break service trips.
Yeah.
There are opportunities to travel domestically and internationally to really live among communities and to be present with those members of the community, learn more about their culture, about them as people. And we have, of course, study abroad programs and other ways that students can engage in travel. But I just really encourage all of you to consider those opportunities here to do just what David has shared with you and the experiences that you can have.
Yeah.
And then don't forget, with the mix of students we have here at Gannon, our global student population, we have incredible opportunities right on campus to engage in dialogue and learn from one another. So that's another way to connect
What a gift.
to that.
And let me say, I highly recommend those alternative spring break trips as well as those study abroad trips. I'm not intending to disparage them at all. It's good to go and do that work. It's also good to be just very conscious about choosing
Correct.
how we do that work.
Yep. So again, many young people believe making change, as you shared, is doing something extraordinary. So how can we see how our ordinary choices can be world-changing?
That's a rich question.
I was kind of thinking, when I thought through that question, you talked about the gifts. And I think sometimes we're humble, or we're maybe not as self-aware yet to understand what gifts we offer. And so bringing those gifts out onto the table and sort of thinking through that. Is there ways in which we can explore that, learn about what our gifts are, and kind of contribute forward?
Yeah, I think one of the things to do is to pay attention to the feedback you're getting from people around you. If somebody says, hey, you've really got a gift for this thing, believe them, right? They're telling you the truth. You should think about how that might be useful, the thing that you've done. And the truth is, anything that you know how to do can be of use in a positive way in changing the world for the better. I said something earlier about, like, if you know how to make pastrami sandwiches, if you know how to fix bicycles. I wasn't being theoretical there or flip. If you believe in a particular cause and there's a nonprofit here in town working for that cause, and you show up one afternoon right around lunchtime with a whole plate of sandwiches and say, hey, I believe in you guys, I made you lunch, here you go. Watch the mood change in that office and see what kind of work they do that day, because they feel seen and known and fed, right? Almost anything you can do can be of service in the world if you think creatively about how to do it.
So you talked a little bit about this evening. Again, we're facing a lot of challenges, and it can be difficult to think about how to change what's happening around us. How do we, this is a student question, how do you stay hopeful and motivated when working for change in a world that can feel divided or discouraging?
Oh, I so appreciate that question. So we've got to define hope. And I'm so glad we got to this tonight. I would have been really sad to leave and not talk about this. Because I think hope can mean at least two things. All words have lots of definitions, right? But let me talk to you about the two that I see most in the world right now. And I think of them as cheap hope and deep hope. And there's a lot of cheap hope out there. That's not what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the deep hope. So cheap hope is about looking away from the problems, pretending everything's okay, or just being optimistic and cheerful and, yeah, like, I think it's all going to be okay. Cheap hope is prognostication, and it's a feeling. It's a prediction of what you think is going to happen. And it's passive. It's just what happens to you. But deep hope is about where you point your life. Václav Havel was the last president of Czechoslovakia and the first of the Czech Republic. He was a playwright and a dissident and a poet, and he had a beautiful way with words. And then he became a head of state. And that's pretty rare for a poet to be a head of state. He said this, he said, hope is not prognostication, it is an orientation of the spirit. So, in my understanding of what he meant by that, hope isn't about what you think is going to happen, it's about where you point your life, sometimes in spite of what you think is going to happen, rather than because of what you're going to think is going to happen. And I think our cultural narrative about hope is that hope is adorable. It's really cute when you're young. And then you get out in the world and you realize how cruel the world is and how totally vicious and heartless people can be. And then you wear off some of that hope. That goes away and you get more realistic. We're living in a time where realistic is equated with cynical. I don't think that's how it works. Because who are your favorite hope mongers? Who are the people who have stood for hope historically? Like Nelson Mandela, for sure. 27 years in prison, like he just needed a couple more years in prison, and then some of that hope would have worn off because he would come to understand how cruel people can be. What? That makes no sense at all. This man knew more about the cruelty of human beings than I will ever know, I hope. And he was still preaching hope. He was pointing his life towards something better. Imagine this, college students. I'm old. I graduated in 1990 from college, all right? So the late 80s, I'll just put that on the table, admit it. Late 1980s, people were organizing on my campus against apartheid, which was the racist government in South Africa that really had laid out laws to keep people down and power in the hands of a white minority. So there were people organizing on campus at James Madison University where I was an undergrad. I would love to tell you I was in those meetings. I would be so proud to have been in those meetings. I wasn't. I had a Mandela t-shirt. That's about as far as it went. But had I gone into that meeting in 1988 or so, and I'd said, hey, guys, what are you doing? Well, we're working on anti-apartheid stuff. And I would say, oh, cool, I want to help. And they would say, okay, what do you know about it? And I would tell them what I knew about it. And then I would say, and here's what I think is going to happen. In a couple of years, I think Mandela is going to get out of prison. And then about a year or two after that, he's going to run for president. And they're not going to kill everybody. But they're going to have a legitimate election. He's going to win. He's going to be the president of South Africa. And then they're going to write a new constitution for the country that will enshrine civil rights more than any other constitution in the history of the world. I think that's what's going to happen in the next 3 or 4 years. What would they have said to me? They would have said, you just ride your unicorn right back out of here because we're living in the real world where things are hard and you're a delusional dreamer. And you know what? All that stuff I just said happened. And it happened because people were doing the work all over the world to draw attention to this horrible thing that was going on in South Africa. So cheap hope says, hey, look, everything's fine. Go home, relax. It's all good. That's cheap hope. Deep hope says everything is not fine, but everything really can be better than it is right now. So do the work. And when you do the work, it makes space for the miracles. When we go home, the odds really go down.
I like that. I'm going to use the do the work. I think that's an important message from this evening. So a lot of our students also wanted to get to know more about you a little bit as well. So one question, is this where you saw yourself when you were in high school and college?
No. No, life's pretty unpredictable. Who knows? When I was in high school and college, when I was in high school, I got my first guitar when I was 15. It was a terrible guitar that each of my older siblings had serially neglected. And I found it in a closet, and the strings were about 1 inch from the neck. It was really hard to play. But I messed around with it enough for my parents to get me a guitar for Christmas. Old Yamaha. I've still got it. It still plays great. It's good old Yamaha. And so I played in my room for about 5 years with the door shut. I played songs, I wrote songs. I didn't bust them out very often. And then in college, I got my courage up through a series of events to go and start playing some open mics. And the open mics turned into like $2 Tuesdays. And those turned into better gigs until eventually I got to play in places like this, where there are rows of chairs of people listening and giving me their full attention, which is such an extraordinary gift. And now I've been doing this for a living for 36 years. And I'm so deeply grateful to get to do it. And then, about 20 years ago, I started doing more speaking gigs. And that happened because I was just passionate about being a human being. And I saw horrible things going on around me, and I wanted to help. And so I started experimenting with that. And I got involved in some movement work, and I got involved in various things. And then I decided I had to go do that master's degree. So I quit at the peak of my career. I quit music for 2 years and went to Australia and India and did that master's. And then I decided I had to write a book about the stuff I was learning, so I wrote the book. And then more people started inviting me to speak, and I got to come to places like this one. Extraordinary. And so I didn't really see any of it coming, but I've had the incredible opportunity to follow some dreams that showed up in front of me. And I'm so grateful to be able to do this here tonight.
Excellent. So another student question, if there's anything that you could go back and potentially add to your book, what would it be? For example, are there specific topics you wish you had covered that are present in today's society?
So it's actually the second edition of the book. I originally wrote the book, I started writing it while I was in India, and I worked on it for about 5 years. And then I finally published it, and I self-published it. I didn't even submit it to a single publisher. And quite a few people bought it. It was kind of amazing. I had a little bit of an audience as a musician, and those people got excited about it, and they shared it with other people. So it went out pretty well for an independent book. And then I was amazed to find a few years later that an actual publisher would be interested in publishing it, given that I had published it myself. So they said, what we need is for it to be about 30% new material. And I said, great, because there's all this stuff I forgot to say and that I really would like to go back and look at now. So I wrote a couple of new chapters. And one of the things I didn't look at in the original edition of the book that I worked on more in the second edition, and I think I could work on even more now, is how does this work with anti-heroes, the whole hero movement lens? And I think it works much the same way, but there's a lot to explore there. And I would love to spend a little more time on that.
Excellent. One of the students also is very curious to know, who do you look up to in the most of the figures that you mentioned throughout your book? Or are there new figures that maybe you would include in future books?
Well, that's a hard question because there are a lot of people I admire that I wrote about. That's why I wrote about them, because they're people I admire. I think Reverend William Barber is a pretty extraordinary human being. He's become a friend of mine, and he's somebody that I think we all need to be paying attention to.
Excellent. So, Kriana says, you write that we're always changing the world in small ways. What's the one small daily habit you think makes the biggest difference over time?
That's an interesting question. There are probably lots of answers to that, but the one that comes to mind right now is just trying to cultivate the practice of seeing people, especially people who don't always feel seen. So when we had dinner tonight, I was glad to have a few words with the woman who was pouring the water in my glass and to connect with her for a second. I think we had a human interaction, and I was really grateful for that. That makes me feel more present and grounded in the world just for me, but I also think it's part of the discipline of creating a better way to be together. So I just say seeing people, trying to see people.
I like the way that allows you to build connections and relationship too. It's one of the first steps.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And I think that as we rediscover each other's humanity, we rediscover our own. We're reacquainted with our heart when we connect with other people's hearts.
Great. So I'm going to end with this question. As students move through college and into the world, what advice would you give them for staying grounded and purpose-driven in their daily lives as they walk through and change the world?
So again, in terms of purpose-driven, I would remind you that you have many purposes, and it's okay if your focus changes as you move through. But point yourself to where your heart feels called right now. Try to live with integrity and do the work before you. Don't wait for the moment to be dramatic and do something big that everybody's going to notice. Do the tedious work that really makes it happen. If we really want to see changes, we've got to gather with other people, decide what we're going to do, what do we have to work with, decide who's going to do which part, when we're going to meet back here again to see if we did it, what we learned, and what we're going to do next. I said in my TEDx talk, and I'll say it again now, I hate to be the one to break it to you, but the fact is, you know what changes the world? Committees change the world. So show up, do the tedious part. That's really how the world changes.
Really?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It doesn't mean that all committees are functional, but that is actually how we do the work. I'm super grateful to be with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, yeah, thank you again.